Just before we start, really, a reminder again that I've got a book, a practical guide. It's been published now something like 6 or 8 years, and I thoroughly recommend it. I also own and manage Dave Cushman's website, which is reckoned to be one of the world's most comprehensive beekeeping website. I'm sure you know of Dave Cushman's website. So that's the commercials out of the way. Many of you know Nell on the right hand side there, and ask where the dogs are. So here they are. There's Nell on the right and Rosie on the left, and that's the battle you'll get from unless somebody knocks on the door. So queen cells then, we can't ignore them, but there are an awful lot of myths and misinformation about them, and they keep being recycled by various people who do a bit of writing occasionally, and it's a constant annoyance to some of us older beekeepers that some of these myths keep going. I will try and cover some tonight, and the reasons why. Now, queen cells, they're obviously natural, but we can replicate that as beekeepers to what we call, or what I call, artificial queen cells. And that's where a lot of the so-called queen rearing is done to provide the queens for commercial sale. But I'm going to concentrate on the natural ones this evening. In the last 20 years or so, there's been some quite serious queen problems that have been experienced by a lot of experienced beekeepers worldwide. Quite a few things, but in general, just three. Young queens being superseded very soon after starting laying, sometimes in their first year, sometimes even after a month or two. Young queens failing, and queens simply disappearing. And at Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, we are on lockdown, yes, but I bet 4 of us are dealing with the colonies. And this last Wednesday, we had 2 cases. Now, that shouldn't really happen. I've got information on Dave Cushman's website. There's also a National Honey Show video. So have a look on the National Honey Show, and you'll see it. I think it was 2017 I did that one. Now, the problem is, from a fairly new beekeeper's point of view, is that if they read the books, they won't tell you about these problems. So it can be misleading. And there is a saying in beekeeping, a very well-worn saying, that bees don't read the books. Well, quite honestly, the books don't always include what they should do. What I'm going to tell you this evening, a lot of it you may not find in books, but it's basically from my own observations of 57 years now keeping bees. Some of it is from the older beekeepers, some of it is stuff I've discovered myself. So natural queen cells then. Personally, I don't think they're understood anywhere near enough. A lot of beekeepers, they just feel they've got to get rid of them, rather than trying to understand why they're there in the first place. So what do most beekeepers do when they see queen cells? If I was in a normal audience, there'd be a few people saying panic. Well, that's very often what happens, and that is a major issue. If they're inspecting the colony and they go, say, a frame or 2 frames in, come to queen cells, immediately they cut them out. I'm suggesting to you very strongly, don't cut them out. And like I say to people when I teach, assess on the way out, action on the way back, because it may well be that that's the only queen cell that's in there, and the queen's been gone a week or 10 days, and that's the only chance you've got of that colony requeening itself. So be very, very careful. Now, queen cells in a colony actually tell you something about the colony. And in fact, basically every time you open a colony, it's telling you something. And if you've got queen cells in, all you've got to do is just have a look, see why they're there, and try and interpret it. But having said that, they can be opportunities as well, because if a good colony is putting up queen cells, you can use that to perhaps requeen other colonies, or perhaps make up nuclei, which is what I spoke about 2 webinars ago. So natural queen cells, then, the bees build them for 3 very different reasons. The end result is the same, a queen bee that heads a colony, but the reasons are very different. Swarm cells, which is really colony reproduction. Emergency cells, where the queen goes missing for whatever reason. And supersedure cells, which in normal circumstances is queen replacement when she's getting to the end of her useful life. So 3 very different reasons. Unfortunately, there are a few people who frown upon them, but I can't see why, because bees have been using those 3 methods of raising queen cells for millions of years. And it's only all of a sudden in the last 100 years or so that a few people decide that they're a problem. But I would reckon that probably 75% of queens in colonies in this country come from natural queen cells, in one way or another. So let's find out a bit about them then. Here's the chart, and I thought you'd all love charts, but I'll make it really simple so I can understand it. The queen egg is laid today, so day 0. After 3 days, it hatches into a larva. After around 8 days, possibly 9, some books will tell you, but I think it's probably wise to go on the cautious side, certainly with queen cells, because it can have quite serious consequences if you get caught out. And after 15 days, the queen emerges. Maybe 16 if you read some books, but work on 15. And as I've already said in one of the other webinars, they're nice and easy to remember, because all you've got to remember is the number 3. Multiply 3 by 3 and you get 8. 3 8s are 15. And if you remember that, that's something you've learned this evening. Now, what do you want to do with these queen cells if you want to make use of them? Well, you really ought to try, if you possibly can, and put them into another colony or nucleus or whatever before they emerge. So try and distribute them a day, 2 days, or possibly a shade earlier if you can. Sorry, let's go back. With natural queen cells, it's not particularly easy to tell how old they are. But if you know roughly when they get sealed, within a day or so of getting sealed, you know that it takes 7 days until they emerge. So perhaps if you distribute them 5 days later, you should be okay. So swarm cells then. This is identification now. I know what the books tell you, that swarm cells are always around the outside or the bottom of the frame, and supersedure cells are always on the face of it. Well, they can be, but very, very often they're not. And this is one of the myths or misinformation that I was talking about. They are built from cell cups straight away. I tend to stick to the term cell cup. I know some people call them play cups, but I don't think the bees are playing at all. I think they know exactly what they're doing. The number is usually more than 4. I think I can only ever remember seeing 4 in a colony, or a handful of times in 57 years of beekeeping. Up to perhaps 30 normally, but they can go way above that on occasions. Now they can be anywhere on the comb, and I'll show you photographs of some that are right in the middle of the comb. So you please don't be fooled by that that misinformation. Now age-wise, they're staggered over anything up to 6 to 7 days, usually perhaps 4, 5, 6 days. I have seen them on occasions as low as only 2 days, but usually there's a fair amount of staggering for them. Now the great thing is that the bees actually build them for us. So if we need queen cells, when are the bees building them? When the colony's in absolutely tip-top condition to do it. So they're going to be well fed right from the start, and they're not going to be spread too thinly and expected to raise 50 queen cells when normally they'd only build 10 or a dozen. They're usually quite plentiful for what the vast majority of beekeepers need, because majority of beekeepers keep 5 colonies or less. I think the average in England and Wales is 4.2 colonies per beekeeper. I've never yet seen anybody with 4.2 colonies, so perhaps 4 to 5 is the average then. So of course they don't need many queen cells. If they do, they can usually find something in a swarming colony that they can cut out quite easily, even if they discard most of them. So in my book, they're really good for what I call the ordinary beekeeper. And that is probably 70 or 80% of us who aren't commercial in some way. Even then, I mean, I've raised probably 100 queens this year already. And if we haven't had very much swarming in West Sussex, but I've used swarm cells already. If they come from a good colony, use them. Now, supersedure cells, they are also from cups, so the starting of them is exactly the same. Now, this is my saying, not anybody else's, but it's usually 1, often 2, occasionally 3. And what I mean by that is there's more chance of there being 1 than there is 3. So there's it's very small numbers. They again can be anywhere on the comb. Forget this business about them only being on the face of the comb. On many occasions I've seen them on the woodwork, and quite often I've seen them on combs where there's absolutely no brood whatsoever. I was hoping to find a photograph to show you, but I couldn't find one. Now, on the comb, they're usually close together. If they're not on the same side of the same comb, they're usually on the same seam. So you won't get one, let's say, 3 frames in from your side and the other one 7 or 8 frames. They'll usually be close together, and a similar age too. You certainly won't get one that's sealed and one that's only an egg or a young larva. They're very similar in age. These days, since in the last 20 years or so, you often see them during the summer with young queens, and this is what throws people very often. They're not realizing that they're supersedure cells when they actually are, and especially if they're round the edge of the comb, people automatically think they're swarm cells. They're not. So emergency cells, these are built when the queen has gone, she's disappeared for whatever reason, and the bees build them on worker larvae, which up to about 5 days from the laying of the egg is apparently identical. The first 2 days of feeding apparently is identical for both workers and queens. I have to say they are very rare in the wild. See them regularly in managed colonies, but I've taken several hundred or removed several hundred colonies from a wild wild places, trees, buildings, that sort of thing. And where you normally a managed colony, you can see evidence of emergency cells year to 3 years afterwards, because the bees don't repair it. I have never ever seen that in the wild. Personally, I think they're really badly misunderstood, and I'll explain a little bit later. Some of the so-called artificial methods, Miller in particular, but Ali as well, they are emergency cells. But you'll get the same people tell you to raise queens by the Miller method. That would tell you that you shouldn't use swarm or emergency cells, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Now, they may be difficult to cut out because they very often come from the midrib. But you'll probably, in a normal colony, you'll probably get 2, 3, 4 that you could use. And if it really is a problem, then just use the comb or the frame with the queen cells on. What bees do prefer to do is build on either new comb or an edge. And I mentioned that I've done a lot of queens this year. In fact, yesterday I introduced 8, and today I introduced another 8. So there's 16. And when you do those sort of numbers and you observe what's happening in your colony, you can see perhaps a nuke, let's say, with 5 combs. 4 of them, the combs are relatively old and 1 young. That's the one that the bees will put the emergency cells on, because if you let's say take a queen away from a colony and you can't get there for another 3, 4, 5 days to replace the queen or put another queen cell in, of course they build their own emergency cells. So recap on that, and this is important, I think. Swarm cells. They're queen cells right from the start, so from cups. More than 4, could be 30 plus, and built anywhere on the comb. Supersedure cells, they look exactly the same as swarm cells individually, also from cups, 3 or less and of the same age. Naturally should be in the autumn. My area of West Sussex from probably back end of July onwards. If you go further north, probably knock a couple of weeks off that. But they're often these days during the summer, so be aware of them. Emergency cells, they're the ones that are built as the queen goes missing. They convert an ordinary worker larva, build it from the midrib, and the bees prefer new comb or the edge of the comb. And I'll give you some examples a little bit later. So identification then. You need to have a look to see what's happening in the colony. Beekeeping is observation, 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 together with some lateral thinking, bit of gumption, the usual sort of things that that make good beekeepers. Just have a look at the signs of what's in the colony, what the colony is telling you. Don't go charging off looking at books, because there probably won't be anything in there, and if there was, it would probably be either wrong or give you a different answer anyway. You get horribly confused. Try and work it out for yourself if you can, because it should be fairly easy to do. So here's some examples I'll give you. This here, what sort of swarm queen cell is that? Well, it's come from a cup, so it could be a swarm or a supersedure individually. It's what's going on around it which will tell you what it is. So it depends on the number. So 3 or less, it will be supersedure. Is that your end or my end, Nick?
Sorry, it's my end.
Oh, all right. Okay. Yeah, 3 or less, it's going to be supersedure. 4, 5, 10, dozen, 15, 20, it is going to be swarm. Don't take any notice of the position or the size. Now the age, if they're very similar in age, they are going to be supersedure. If they're staggered, they are going to be a swarm. I haven't mentioned too much about size, but I keep reading and hearing that supersedure cells are bigger than swarm cells. I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's a frame with 4 queen cells on. They're on the face of the comb. Now don't forget, swarm cells are supposed to be around the edge, supersedure cells on the face of the comb, but there's more than 3 of them, so they are very definitely swarm cells. The one on the bottom left, you'll see that's dimpled. The one at the top isn't so dimpled, it's smoother. And you may read that if you get smooth queen cells, there's something wrong with them. Well, have a look at queen cells. Don't be frightened to keep opening the hive up. Have a look, and what you'll find is the one at the top, give it another couple of days, and it'll be dimpled like the one at the bottom left. And the reason is that, and you can check this out yourself, when a queen cell is about to get sealed, it really is quite smooth. And then the bees seal it, and then they work on it for several days, and they put the dimpling on. So there's one tip for you. The 2 on the right, they're fairly close together. On many occasions, I've tried to separate them with razor blades, scalpels, all sorts of things like that. But the wall thickness between them is usually so thin that you lose one or both of them. Don't mess around, don't be mean, just pinch one of them out and use whichever one you like the look of best. Certainly, before the middle of July, there's plenty of queen cells in most places. You don't have to be mean. Here's 5 queen cells on the face of a comb. Look, absolutely nothing around the edge. More than 3. So some people say, oh yeah, they're supersedure, but I can tell you that they're swarm cells. These, however, are supersedure. Look, they're close together. They're not on the face of the comb, but have a look at the tips. The bees have started thinning them down, which they tend to do in the last 24, 36 hours. So they're both fairly similar in age. If they're the only ones in the colony, 100% certain they're supersedure cells. Very occasionally, you'll see wire going through a cell. So if, let's say, you got those 2 and you want one, you want both of them, the top one, you can cut that out normally, and the bottom one, what you find is the wire never goes through the middle of the cell, always through the wall. You can tease it out with a sharp knife or a scalpel, but probably the easiest thing to do is just use the comb with the queen cell on it. This is an emergency cell. You can see it's a face of the comb, and the cell is just starting to sorry, that's my phone going. It's just coming out of the bees are just drawing it out from the surface of the comb. There's another couple in a similar sort of position. In fact, there's 5 there altogether. You'll see there's 2 pairs and one on its own. You'll probably only get 3 cells out of that, but you'll have to cut round, when they're sealed, of course, you'll have to cut round the cut round the cell all the way through the midrib. Notice it's a young comb, look. Or perhaps the edge of the comb, just like that. Now, some people will be forgiven for thinking that they're probably swarm cells, but just have a look at them. They're very, very definitely emergency cells. Some things you need to know. The more queen cells there are built in a colony, usually the more swarmy it is. So perhaps in your apiary, you've got 6 colonies, let's say, you've got 2 preparing to swarm. One's got 8 or 10 queen cells at the point of swarming, that is. So when the first one is about to be sealed and the other one's got 40, the one that's got 40 is probably going to be far more swarmy as a colony than the other one. So if you've got a choice of which ones to take queen cells from, if everything else is sort of reasonably equal, then take them from the lesser one. I've got a little bit of a rule now. I'm taking about a dozen as my break-even point. It used to be 18, but now I've lowered the swarming quite a bit in my bees. So now I'm coming down to about 12. So anything under 12, if it's a good colony, then I'll use it. Over 12, it's got to have some pretty good characteristics that perhaps none of the others have got. If you remove queen cells, the bees will build more. So if you've got a colony putting up queen cells and the queen is still there, if you remove them, the chances are they will build more swarm cells or even supersedure cells. Now, if you remove the queen, and let's say there are 15 swarm cells, if you remove the queen at the point of swarming and leave them like that, they will probably stay like that. If you perhaps remove a couple, that'll be okay. But if you take 10 away, the chances are they'll build another 10 to get up to that sort of number. There seems to be a number that some colonies are comfortable with, and you probably won't see it in many books, but there is a term called peak queen cell number, which I think might have been coined by the late Beowulf Cooper. He's certainly in his book, Honeybees of the British Isles. So a few myths and misinformation. I haven't got room for all of them, so they're just the common ones. How often I've heard that bees only swarm on swarm cells because that's what they're built for. I've had bees on many occasions swarm leaving just supersedure cells or emergency cells. If the colony's in the right condition and the weather is right, probably in 80% of the cases, out they'll go. So please, please, please don't believe that one. I've already mentioned where queen cells are supposed to be on the comb. All these things that I'm telling you, you don't have to believe me. Just work it out for yourself, observe it for yourself, and I think after a year or two, you'll realise that I was not too far from the truth. I'll mention again, supersedure cells are bigger than swarm cells, and I do keep hearing this one, but it's very unlikely you'll get supersedure cells in a colony where you've got swarm cells. So how on earth are you going to compare them? Not only that, look in a colony when it's swarming and you'll see the swarm cells are different sizes. So it just doesn't make sense. But I think it's just one of these things that people just simply cut and paste because somebody else said so. Oh dear, this one. This really annoys me that beekeepers are told to leave 2 queen cells if they do. And the reason given is insurance. In case one queen cell is dead, you've always got the other one. But there's 2 things against that. One is if the colony's in the right condition and the weather's fine, the chances are the colony will actually swarm on the first one to emerge. And I'm pretty certain the bees are quite good at actually keeping virgin queens apart. So and even probably even keeping some imprisoned until the other one's gone. The other thing is, it takes several days for a colony to realise that a queen cell is dead. And I'm talking about 4, 5, sometimes 6. And the more you're into beekeeping, the more you think to yourself, crikey, that queen cell's taken a long time to emerge. And 4 days later, it's still there, still sealed, cut it open, and you've got a black mush inside. So it does take bees quite a long time to realise that the queen cell is dead. So if it's dead, half your bees plus the queen that emerged has gone. So it really doesn't make sense. So I really shouldn't believe that one. In any case, if you're going to believe it, I suggest very, very strongly that you get yourself on the local swarm list. And next time somebody phones up within 2 miles of you saying they've got bees in their chimney, you go and sort them out, because the chances are they could have come from you. Swarm cells perpetuate swarming. I think the thinking is that if you get a colony that keeps swarming and use the queen cells, you'll perpetuate that trait. But think about it a little bit. A lot of the swarming is caused by beekeepers doing daft things like not putting supers on in time, leaving 2 queen cells, all sorts of things like that. And putting hives in full sun. So you can't really blame the bees for that. But in any case, what's the difference between using swarm cells than taking larvae from that colony 2 or 3 weeks before they swarmed? None at all. I really do think it's an old wives' tale. Don't use queen cells that are near drone brood. There's this so-called king bee that is supposed to exist, where the queen cells contain drones. I can tell you that the only time in 57 years of keeping bees that I've had that happen is where you get a drone laying queen or a laying worker, and they build queen cells, and of course they've got infertile eggs. I have never ever seen it, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but if there was a good queen cell right next to drone brood, and I like the look of it, I'll take it. Emergency queen cells produce scrub queens. Well, they can do, but I shall give you a few clues in a few slides' time how to get over this. And it's quite easy enough. I have had some really cracking queens produced with emergency cells. Leave unsealed queen cells. And the reason I keep hearing is that the sealed ones can be dud. But hang on a minute. In a day or 2 days' time, the unsealed ones are going to be sealed. So why can't they be dud? I think what it is, you've probably got quite inexperienced beekeepers misinterpreting a trick that the bees have got. And that is that very often you get a queen cell emerge, the tip hinges down, out comes a queen, says hello to everybody. A worker bee goes in to clean out the residual royal jelly, and for some reason, absolutely no idea why, apart from perhaps just a bit of mischief, the other bees put the lid back, and then I say reseal it. It's not firmly sealed, but certainly enough so that the worker bee can't back out. And very often, even I've been, in fairly recent years, I've been fooled by a queen cell with a dead worker upside down. So I think it's a misinterpretation. Now the trick, of course, is just with your fingernail or a hive tool, just touch the tip of the queen cell if you want to leave one that's sealed. And if the tip comes off easy, probably what you'll find is a dead worker upside down. I do, however, think it's quite a good idea to leave unsealed queen cells, because certainly natural queen cells, you don't always know the age. And even as experienced beekeeper, I can only guess within a day or so. Inexperienced beekeeper, obviously less so. So if you know it's unsealed, you know it's got at least 7 days to emerge. Therefore, it gives you extra time. So going back to this chart, queen cells are sealed for 7 days. So if you're a weekend beekeeper and you can't handle the bees in between, instead of having a queen cell that's going to emerge, if you leave one that's got a day or 2 days to go to sealing, if you are a weekend beekeeper, let's say you do your beekeeping on a Saturday morning or whatever, or Sunday afternoon, if you do it the appropriate day the following week, in theory, you shouldn't have a queen cell that emerges. So there is a good reason, but not the one that we normally give them. Now, what happens in a colony when a queen is removed? I know what the books will say, and I know the answer that you're supposed to give if you want to pass your exams. But by accident, I found out an alternative. I'm not saying that what's in the books doesn't happen, but these are my observations, and they really aren't shared by books. Take a queen away from a colony, and depending on the size of it, excuse me, sorry Nick, you told me not to cough. Bees will normally realise within perhaps an hour or a couple of hours for a big colony. The smaller the colony, the quicker they'll realise it, because of course the diminishing pheromone is well, the pheromone then is not getting around the colony. Some colonies will be absolutely calm, not even raw. This afternoon I handled 8 colonies that I took the queen away from 3 days ago within probably a couple of hours of each other. They were behaving differently. Some were giving a really strong roar. Others, you would think they're still queen right. Some colonies can be frantic in a couple of hours. And I've dequeened single brood chamber colonies that the bees within a couple of hours have been running around outside the hive and all over the roof. So they do vary differently. Quite why, I've no idea. When do they start emergency cells? Well, this was a question in one of the exam modules a few years ago. And I have to say I couldn't get the answer from the exam board, because I actually wanted to know, because I've done a bit of work on it. And it really is quite wide, and I'll show you in a minute some figures. Some have started within about 8 hours, others 48 hours, and they still haven't started emergency cells. Now, they stagger them over 3 to 4 days. Now, that's not what we're told, but I can assure you that they do, and I'll give you some figures in a minute. We're very often told that they use larvae that are too old. They can do, but again, I'll tell you why in a minute. In my experience, they usually use young larvae if available, and you can always check this yourself. Always check it. Just have a look when they've started forming the queen cell. Have a look at the size of the larva in the cell compared to a swarm cell or a supersedure cell. Now, if you cut out any emergency cells, so after 4 or 5 days or whatever we're told to do, the bees will build more. So let's say they built 15. If you then cut them down to only 5, the chances are they'll build about another 10. All right, it might be 8, it might be a dozen. But now this, what I call the second wave, after the beekeepers cut them out, these are the ones that they start all together. I think, because they realise their options are running short. These are the ones that are often on older larvae and usually end up with poorer queen cells. And this, I think, is why emergency cells have a bad reputation, simply because beekeepers are told to cut out the ones that get sealed first. The thinking is, which I think is erroneous, is that because they're supposed to start all at the same time, the ones that are capped first are on the older larva, whereas I'm pretty certain they're not. So this second wave, I don't call them emergency cells, I call them panic cells, because quite frankly, I think that's what they are. Now, on the 22nd of May 2019, well, I'd already done a little bit of work, and I'd realised that things varied quite a bit. So 22nd of May 2019, I took 4 colonies, A, B, C and D, that's the first column, and over 6 days, I went into the colony the same time every day to see what the bees had done. I shook the bees off and I counted them. So there was nothing that I missed. So this is what happened with colony A. After 24 hours, no queen cells. 48 hours, no queen cells. 3 days later, they put up 2, 3, 5, 6. So over 4 days, they put an extra 4 queen cells up. Anyway, let me explain just a little bit more. Colony A was actually a swarm that came into a bait hive on the 12th of April, which is quite early. So about 6 weeks earlier than that. This may have been a reason why the low number of emergency cells built. Before I forget it, I better mention that I think it was November 2019, BBKA News. This was an article, so you can have a look back to the back numbers and check for yourself, and you'll get what I did as well. Colonies B, C and D, they were all very, very similar. All 4 colonies, 2 to 3 supers on, and they all had overwintered queens. So in fact, I would assume that the incoming swarm was either the previous year's queen or the one before that. Colony B, and that was the one that started with 14 on the first day, look. 14 on the first day, another 10 after 2 days, another 9 after 3 days. So they're not building them all together. I know this is only 4 colonies, so it's a very small sample, but I think there's enough to say that it's not as simple as it's made out to be. Anyway, after 4 days, 3 queen cells have been aborted, and you can tell that because the bees have torn them down. So they were up to 30, down to 30 rather. They clearly didn't need them all, but they decided to build another 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4 days afterwards. And after 5 days, one of those was aborted again, and they built another one to replace it. Seems strange, but these are not the sort of things the ordinary beekeeper notices. It's noticed by people like me who are inquisitive. Number 5, yeah, so 5 down it. Colony C, after 5 days, they come down from 2. They put 2 up and then left that number for 3 days, and then they'd lost 1 and didn't do anything about it. But wait just a minute. Whoops, can't go. Whoa, yeah, can't go back. Yeah. Yeah, they'd they did nothing about it. But then they put 4 up at this point here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And this one here, colony D, after 5 days, 2 had been aborted for whatever reason, don't know, but they should have been sealed by then anyway. And they built none. So that was just a simple experiment that any beekeeper could do. If you've got enough colonies, just open the colonies the same time every day, and it's surprising how much you learn. Now, if you're looking for queen cells, I suggest very strongly that you shake the combs. If you don't want to save the queen cells, you can shake like that if you like. I don't like shaking in the box because I've only ever seen 5 queens killed in 57 years. 2 of them were on the same day by 2 different demonstrators at the same event, shaking down inside the box. So that's why I don't do it. Shake across the box like that. So if the queen happens to be on there, she's going straight down into the box rather than over the side. If you, I know there's a view that you will damage queen cells. Quite frankly, I don't think you do. But for the ordinary beekeeper with only a few colonies, don't risk it. I've always shaken this way, hold the frame lug and just give your wrist a thump. That isn't me, by the way. That was me taking the photograph. It's those last 2 are our demonstrators, 2 of our demonstrators, and that's how most beekeepers at Whisper Green, or certainly the demonstrators, handle their bees. No bee suit and no gloves. You need to be careful. You must shake bees off frames. I repeat, you must shake bees off frames. I took a long time saying that, hoping that you'd spot what was there. There's the side of a brood frame with normal sort of number of bees on. Shake the bees off, and what's underneath? That. Now, that's quite a big queen cell. Also have a look at it, it's smooth. That's probably because it's only just been sealed. In 4 days' time, that will look a very different queen cell. Right, here's another one. Bottom end of a brood frame. Shake the bees off, queen cell underneath. Here's another one. There's 2 bees covering that queen cell up. Shake the bees off, and there's the queen cell. Now that is probably one of the second wave queen cells that I was telling you about, emergency cells. That can give you a boatload of problems because it will emerge. Probably will get mated, no trouble at all. But you try and find it amongst workers that are roughly the same size. Here's another one that I actually took yesterday. Photograph was taken yesterday. Where's the queen cell? Push the bee out of the way. And there it is. That there is a queen cell. So you need to be very, very careful. That queen cell there could mean that somebody else has started beekeeping, not with a national hive, but one made out of bricks. If you're cutting queen cells out and you want to use them, and I'll suggest very strongly that if you've got a colony putting up queen cells, that is an emergency cell, by the way, but the same point. If you've got a colony putting up queen cells, don't just raw them out. Cut 2 or 3 of them out just in case you need them, because you may at a later date, you may well come across a colony that's queenless or something of that nature. So don't just chuck them into the long grass. Now, where do you put your queen cell? I'm very often asked, well, have a look around the comb. This is obviously just under the top bar, and there's a hole there. So all you need to do is just do a little bit of gardening to it. I think there's a queen cell. Yeah, there's an old queen cell in the way there. Move that out of the way. Take a queen cell, push it in by the comb that's at the back that you've left. Don't push it in by the queen cell because you'll damage it, you'll squash it. So there it is, and within minutes the bees will fix that in, and that should emerge no trouble at all. If you can't do that and you haven't got any gaps, then just push your thumb straight down to the midrib, draw it down a bit, and you've got exactly the same thing. If you've got brood, try to put it within the brood area. If you haven't, because the colony's been queenless for so long, then where the brood would normally be, that is the empty cells in the middle of the brood nest. I'm also very often asked what size a queen cell, and quite frankly, it's difficult to say unless you've got something in front of you. But there's one up against a 50p piece. So if that gives you a little bit of a clue, that's okay. The smaller ones I would, if they're very much smaller, I would ignore. If they're longer and really long, don't think you're going to get a nice long queen that won't get to the queen excluder, because you probably won't get a queen at all. Because what sometimes happens, not very often, but sometimes happens, is that the larva drops away from the food and the bees extend the side of the cell to accommodate the larva, and you can end up with them sometimes 8 or 10 millimeters longer. They're obviously longer. Just discard them. Don't even think about it. So there is either a supersedure cell or a swarm cell. You can tell that because it's come from a cut, because it's on wood. There is the emergency cell, and don't forget the half or part of the emergency cell is back into the midrib. So that's probably quite a reasonable one. That's also up against a 50p piece. I know it looks smaller, but I'm pretty certain you'll get a decent queen out of that. Now, sometimes you come across queen cells with holes in the side. Why is that? Well, it could be that an earlier queen has emerged and the bees have decided that they don't want any more, so they go round and destroy the other queen cells. It could be perhaps a queen cell has been put into a colony and they're queen right. You very often get it with laying workers. They just won't accept them. I know some people say that it's the virgin queens that chew the holes in the side. I may do occasionally, but I think it's very largely the workers that do it, simply because of circumstances. So there it is, and the area around the bottom here. Don't be frightened to cut old queen cells up. What you'll find is the cocoon down the bottom here is actually pretty tough. So the bees seem to find it easier, and they know it's easier to go into the top here. So here's another couple a lot further down the road, and you can see what the bees do, and they chew around this area here, and then they just chuck this outside. They don't chew it up at all. You can see that those haven't emerged. If they had done, there would have been a hole in the end. So if you want to put a queen cell into a colony that's either got a queen or only recently had a queen, so pheromones are still going around, the chances are that the bees will destroy them. So what we've got to try and do is stop the bees chewing here. So what we do is find a way of covering this area up, because they can't chew in the end here very easily. Can't chew in the end. So what do? We try and cover up the top of the queen cell, and we call it protecting. So that's if the queen has recently been removed. So if you take a queen away and put a queen cell in straight away, the chances are within a quarter of an hour or so, the bees would have chewed it down. Up until, I reckon I can get away with 4 hours in a normal colony before putting one in. If I was advising beginners, I'd say probably put one in the next day. Now, the smaller the colony, the more you can get away with. And there are such things as little mini mating nukes. I've taken queens out of those and put queen cells straight in. They realise within minutes that they're queenless. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about well, certainly a normal standard nuke. So if you don't want to do that or can't do it, then protect. So how would you do that? Well, there are various gadgets for doing so, but I'm not a great one for gadgets, and I'm advised fairly strongly that I tend to lose things, so I don't want to run the risk of losing anything. But this is an ideal piece of kit. A piece of silver foil, and make sure it's metal, not plastic, because bees can chew the plastic. And you can tell easy enough because if you crumple it up, the metal stays crumpled up and the plastic recovers. And at one stage, Kit Kat wrappers were made out of plastic, so you couldn't use those. Anyway, get a piece of silver foil, 4 or 5 inches square, fold it in half one way and then half the other way. Just nip the corner off with a pair of scissors, or you can do it with a hive tool if your hive tool sharp. Open it out, and then you end up with a little square like that. Put the queen cell through it, and then fold the foil around like that. Nice and easy look, and then put that into the hive in a comb. When they emerge, this is a different one, obviously. That's what happens, and they work an absolute treat. Now, I think probably from a beginner's point of view, I think I would probably advise protecting anyway. There's probably no need to if the colony's been queenless 4 hours or more, but you might as well do it. Now, if you've got a colony with a laying worker, that could be difficult. So protect it, and you should be able to get away with it. So uses then. I assume you know what a test comb is, although perhaps some don't. If you're not sure if a colony is queen right or not, then usually, I don't say always, but usually, if you put a frame of eggs and young larvae in from another colony, if it's queenless, it should start building emergency cells. I'm afraid occasionally they don't, and certainly if they've got a laying worker, they probably wouldn't. Right, so you could do exactly the same thing with a sealed queen cell. If you've got a sealed queen cell, and bearing in mind that's what you need anyway to get the colony up and running. If you've got a sealed queen cell, put that in, have a look the following day and see if it's still intact or if it's chewed down. If it's chewed down, the chances are they've got something that satisfies them it's a queen. It may not actually be a queen, but it could be a laying worker or a dud queen. So there's one use. Now here's an old trick that I was taught years and years ago, and I just don't see people do it these days. If you want to requeen a colony, and this works especially well if you've got a colony that's a bit touchy. If you can get the supers off, just take the queen excluder off and put a protected cell down between one of the gaps between the combs. And I won't say all the time, but probably 70 or 80% of the time, what happens is that queen emerges and supersedes the existing queen. And I've done that on several occasions with bad temper colonies that I just couldn't be bothered trying to find the queen, because if they're bad tempered, you've got to smoke them all to keep them under control. That drives the queen away. And once I've been successful every time, but certainly very often. So that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Okay, Roger, we've got quite a few questions coming up. The first one is just about, is the recording going to be available? And yes, it will be available. I'll put it up late. It sometimes takes 24 hours to come up. But if you go to the website, BIBBA.com, and click on the webinar section, you will find that you can find the recording. We've had a couple of questions on cutting out queen cells. What tool do you use, Roger?
Some of them don't actually need very much at all. They put them on like legs, so you can get away with that. I generally use a sharp knife. Hang on. Yeah, that sort of knife. If they're sharp, you're okay. I've used hive tool, but I tend to use a sharp hive tool. I don't like these blunt-ended ones. So yeah, cut them out. You've got to be careful of wires, obviously, but you can see where the wires go in the combs, and you can avoid them.
Okay, and another question, how long can a queen cell last after cutting from the hive?
Oh, how long you got? If you put it on the front seat of your car in full sun, or if you put it in full sun, it ain't going to last very long at all. In general, the older it is, the longer they will last, and you can probably keep them out of the hive sometimes 3-4 hours or more. You know, and you can tell if they're fairly close to emerging. The old boy that taught me in early days, he used to wear a cap, and he handled bees for other people. That was his living. And if early in the day he came across queen cells, he cut them out, put them in his cap, and he very often needed them towards the end of the day. But of course, you've got the body warmth then. Yeah, you need to keep them quite warm. It'd be interesting to know why the question was asked, because if it's a case of cutting them out, let's say, of a full colony, if you've got a nucleus that's queenless, sometimes you can bank them for you know, a day or so, and with a nucleus, unless it's absolutely bursting with bees, it's unlikely that it will swarm. So if, let's say, you put 3 or 4 queen cells in there, you can, if one emerges, the chances are they won't swarm. You can put them in those hair curlers, but you've got to do a little bit of tweaking to get them in. But as I say, it'd be interesting to know why the person asked. If they got an out apiary, let's say half hour drive away. If it's fairly well advanced, you can easily take a queen cell out, perhaps put it in your top pocket or something. You know, keep it fairly warm. It won't be a problem. But if it's only just sealed, you'll probably lose it.
Okay, because we had another question. Can you move queen cells just after they are sealed?
Yes, you can do, but then all sorts of things happen. The great thing about a queen cell when it's about to emerge is that it takes, what, 3 or 4 days for an emergency cell to get sealed. If you've got, let's say, 5 days or 6 days to go with your normal queen cell, what can happen is, if it's a biggish colony, they can swarm on that and leave the emergency cell to take over the colony, because bees don't know their emergency cells.
Okay, and comment that you mentioned young queens being superseded during the summer months. Do you think this is a response to Varroa or commercialization of queen breeding? And he's mentioned that he often sees his bees supersede at almost impossible times during autumn.
Sorry, I didn't pick that. So somebody...
His bees supersede at impossible times during the autumn.
Oh, that's natural. Towards the end of the year, in my area, I know I'm in the south, but any time, this is naturally, any time between about the middle of July right through the middle of September. I've had queens mated in October on many occasions. Now, that is natural. What isn't natural is right now, or April, May, June, July. That's not natural, especially with young queens.
Okay, I've got another one. Somebody who's just set up their first hive, and how long can he expect before he sees queen cells and needs to think about managing swarms?
I don't know if he's listening or not, but we've got a young member who bought a nuke commercially early this year, or he acquired a nuke. How he got it, I don't know. That swarmed, I think, a month ago. So it depends.
So it's got to be prepared and start a weekly check.
Always, yeah. I mean, you can have nukes. Nukes swarm. If anybody tells you a nuke won't swarm, don't believe them, because they jolly well can. I've had one go this year. It was my own fault. I made it up with a couple of frames of sealed brood, which is what I warn other people not to do. And I was a day or so late getting back. I knew it was going to be a problem. I was a day or two late getting back, and they'd gone.
Okay, I've now got somebody who has an elderly queen still laying in her 5th season. In the past 2 months, there have been 2 supersedure cells, although no supersedure has taken place. A third is now on the comb. Should she remove the old girl to give this larva a chance, or leave nature to take its course?
Let nature take its course.
That's
I would, these days, quite honestly, I would, I'm not, I'm questioning whether queens actually genuinely live 5 years. If they're not clipped, they're not marked. It's not always easy to tell. It's surprising how often a colony will change queens during the summer. It really is. It was for green teaching April. We've had a couple and haven't noticed them, and we do fortnight checks.
Okay, another one. If you have colonies producing queen cells and still a queen present, if you remove the cells, will they ever stop building queen cells?
They can do. It depends if you do something else. What sort of queen cells? If they're supersedure cells, then they'll just carry on, usually. If they're swarm cells, they might give up, but you need to do something else, like add supers or, give extra space or something like that. What I haven't said is that right at this very moment, at Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, we've got a colony with a queen laying away, absolutely fine, no problem, no sign of reduction in laying or anything like that. Would you believe we've got both swarm cells and emergency cells in the same colony? Now, that just simply should not happen because you've got different pheromones telling the bees different things. But all these strange sort of things have only just started happening in the last 20 years.
Okay, got another one. Don't you think that if on a single brood box, no matter if you had supers for space, the actual brood box still gets overpopulated, causing swarming? Better with some colonies to add extra brood space.
I think I mentioned, oh, it was to, I gave a question and answer session to Mayo Beekeepers Association, and this question was almost asked then. The size of the brood chamber that's needed is relative to the type of bees you've got. So if you've got bees with a non-prolific queen, they will quite happily survive in a single brood chamber, summer and winter. If you've got a prolific queen, of course they won't. And how many? I've now got 25 colonies in my garden, and I think I've had one attempt to swarm, and we got over 20 in Whisper Green Teaching Apiary, and certainly one, possible. I doubt if there's another one. So, okay, we're fairly low swarming this year, but if we'd have got prolific queens, I think they'd have been out and gone. The size of brood chamber is relative to the type of bee you've got.
Okay, got another one. You said that the bees thin the cells just before emergence. Does the new queen also chew herself out?
Yes, very definitely. In fact, as I do now, I generally cage my queens, and the bees can't get out of the cells. Worker bees can't get out of the cells, and the queens just chew through from inside.
Okay, and a question here. Someone who's never had more than 3 cells, either swarm, supersiege or emergency, in any of his 5 colonies. Is this very unusual?
Yeah, really unusual. 5 colonies. I would suggest they're probably in an area of with a sort of harsh climate, and my guess is that they've got what are called supersedure bees, and they very definitely don't build very many queen cells. You know, if I go to some of the outlying areas where there's the climate is harsh, you just don't see the number of queen cells that you do elsewhere.
Okay, I've got another who say they have a colony with a sealed queen cell. If they produce more cells, is it worth removing all cells except the sealed one to avoid swarming?
So there's one sealed cell.
This is what the question says.
Right. If you've got an unclipped queen and you leave a sealed cell, I'm surprised they're still there, because I would have thought they would have swarmed. Can you read the question out again, please,
Yeah.
Nick?
I have a colony with a sealed queen cell. If they produce more cells, is it worth removing all cells except the sealed to avoid swarming?
Well, if you've got a sealed queen cell, that is really the trigger for the colony to swarm.
So maybe they've swarmed already and left the cell.
I don't know, Nick.
Yeah. Okay. I think, I mean, we've gone well over the hour. And I think probably we'd better wind it up now, Roger. I think I've gone through all the questions, tried to merge similar ones together.
Okay.
So I think that's about it. Oh, well, just one thing, Roger, a little maths question.
Huh.
What does 3 times 8 equal?
3/8 of 15.
Try it again.
Yeah. 3 3s are 8. 3/8 of 15.
Roger, I think we'd better teach you some maths. 3 3s are
No.
9.
No.
3
No,
8.
no, 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 no. No, that's one of the myths of beekeeping. Misinformation, that is, Nick. Believe me, honest.
Right. Okay, well,
Honest. 3 3s are 8. 3/8 of 15.
right. Well, we've got a new method of calculating.
You don't need calculators and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Roger, and thank you to everyone who's been watching.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Nick, for hosting it, and thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Is that both of them?
Okay.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Bye,
Good night.
everyone.